Before we get started, our basic housekeeping. Uh, if you are already attending the sessions, needless to say, please join the Zulip link. If you are new, attending the session for the first time, please join the Zulip link. This is the FHIR India Community Discussion Forum. All the previous recordings, slides, and interacting with the community members, you can do it here. So scan the QR code, join the Zulip link. I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, and next, session's expectations. So the expectation of the session is at the end of the session, you will be able to understand how to navigate the FHIR documentation. Okay, we will try to deep dive into a resource. Maybe we'll take a patient resource or an encounter resource and try to see like what are the resource documentation, what are the linkages, what are the various things, and try to learn FHIR through that resource. Okay. We will talk about FHIR profiles because in the ABDM session that we had on 2nd and on the session on 1st, we did talk about a little bit on conformance terminologies, and even I think the session on 27th ended with conformance. So we will continue profiles, but again, it will be an overview. It will not be a deep dive. Deep dive, we will see if there is maturity, if there is enough grasp, we will take the profiles. And finally, we will devote a lot of time on questions and answers and discussions. Okay. So we want it to be an interactive session, more about discussions, clarifying the doubts, then a monologue or then an expert session. So that's how we want to run this session. Okay. Now, since we are talking about FHIR India community, so what is a FHIR India community? So FHIR India community, as you all would have known by now, is a very, very open, very, very dynamic community where folks from all backgrounds come together with the common theme or a common passion of how do they advance healthcare interoperability, and specifically their what do you say, love for FHIR. That's the FHIR India community. So what it means is FHIR, though FHIR is the what do you say, the core theme, but we discuss other standards, we learn other standards as well. Okay, so the community, the name should not mislead you. Okay, and we request you to join the LinkedIn group because this is the LinkedIn group of the community. So where people share posts, people share different knowledge materials, right? So those who don't interact much on Zulip, they can share it on there, right? So, but Zulip is more for discussion. This is more for sharing a post, liking a post, more of a social media kind of a thing. We have HL7, the FHIR India community social media tag, that is the FHIR India hashtag. So you can use that if you are talking about FHIR India community, and that those posts can be filtered out, right? Or can be seen by the FHIR India community. Okay, whoever is following the tag FHIR India. So I'll again take 30 seconds. Anyone who has not joined the LinkedIn group, please do join. Now, what we do here is we will get onto the session now. So course layout, I think you already know what it is. The idea is like we'll have 10 to 12 hours, 4 weekends, and around 3 hours per weekend. It will be theory plus practical, and there will be bonus sessions. Zoom and Zulip will be our default tools. Acknowledgements. So none of the materials are prepared fresh, or you can say like they have been invented. The community, the FHIR India community, the global FHIR India FHIR community, sorry, not the FHIR India community, the global FHIR community has created a lot of resources, right? Which has made our lives easier. So what we do, and Everything is in Creative Commons Zero license, which means we are free to use uh, the the resources, the content, the presentation, as long as we give credit. Okay, and that's a good thing about the community. So in the community, you are free to use what the community is doing as a social cause, as long as you make correct attributions, right? So that is what we also encourage in our community. Please do feel free to use any of the artifacts that are generated by the community, but just make sure that you are giving the due credit. The global community can be found at chat.fire.org. So towards the end of the sessions, means not this, but the third or the fourth one, we will try to move uh, or introduce everyone to chat.fire.org. Majority of you would have already been there. It's like Zulip. It's a Zulip platform only, but that's global. That's where like tens and 10,000 or more than 10,000 members are there who actively discuss various aspects of FHIR, implementation, and then specification development, and other things. So I'll also recommend you if you're like, if you want, if you if you're not shy enough, you should just join that chat at fire.org. People are very welcoming, and there will be no dumb questions. Means no one will say that you have asked a dumb question. So you can just join there and start interacting. That will build your knowledge as well. So with that, we start today's session. The first thing is we recap what is FHIR. FHIR is an acronym. It's a standard. The latest release is R5. Resources are the building blocks, and FHIR supports multiple paradigms. Since this slide was taken from last week's presentation, documents is highlighted because we discussed FHIR documents in the context of ABDM last week. FHIR specification is at hl7.org/FHIR. We'll view that today extensively. Okay. We did talk about FHIR resources also in the sessions. A FHIR resource, as you know, is the smallest unit of exchange in FHIR, right? So whenever data exchange comes, FHIR is resources are the the smallest unit, right? Resources are logical, and they have a defined behavior and a meaning. They have an identity, and they can be considered uh, as something of interest to healthcare, right? So resources are healthcare entities of interest, right? So some of the examples of resources are given in the left-hand side bottom. You can look at them. On the right-hand side, we have a basic structure of a FHIR resource, okay? Mainly, you see four sections or four distinct sections in a FHIR resource. The first one will be FHIR metadata or the resource metadata. This will be the information about the resource itself. Like, for example, when the resource was created, what is the security that is applied, what is the language that is there, all those, what is the version of the resource, those things you can find in the resource identity and the metadata. The next section is human readable interoperability to enable human readability and interoperability, base level interoperability. Here, you will find narrative sections, and this will be more like in XHTML, and they are intended to be summary of the content of the resource, important summary of the content of the resource that you are referring. Okay. Now, we have also seen 80-20 rule, which says that your FHIR resource, the base FHIR resource, may not have all the attributes, all the entities that you might need in your specific use case. So that definitely calls for some kind of extensions. You can have extensions that are standard extensions, or you can define your own extensions. Those extensions go in the extension section in the resource body. And finally, you have the actual resource data, that is the structured data. So this is a normal structure of a FHIR resource. If you are familiar with this, I think your learning curve becomes easier. All right. So today, what we do is we start with a clinical scenario so that we start putting in use of whatever knowledge we have gained so far. Okay. So this is a clinical scenario, typical clinical scenario of a 5-year-old boy. He had two consultations, first consultation and second consultation. And in the first consultation, the boy came with the complaint in the pain in the right ear. For 3 days, he has an elevated temperature. His temperature is 38 degrees, and there is some inflammation, and so on and so forth, right? And the follow-up consultation is again 5 days later. Some allergies are found, some rashes are there. That's all, right? So now what we do is, how do we break out this particular clinical scenario into healthcare entities? So they may not be exactly resources, but let's see. So first, 5-year-old boy, right? If we have to represent this information, 5-year boy, that information can be represented in a patient resource, correct? First consultation, okay? What does it say? It's an encounter, right? So encounter resource can be used, okay? Pain in the ear for 3 days. What does it say? It says patient has a condition, right? So condition resource. Elevated temperature, 38 degrees, inflamed right eardrum. These are all observations, correct? And then you have a diagnosis. Diagnosis is again a condition. And finally, you have a medication that is prescribed, right? So you see, using these 5 resources, you are able to capture this clinical scenario, right? Or you can document this clinical scenario in FHIR. Okay. Same thing happens for the next one. In the next one, you have 2 more things. One is an adverse reaction that comes in because the guy has a rash, and then the guy has also a allergy. So you add 2 more resources, allergy and adverse reaction. So with me so far? Now, what we do is the same thing. If we have to record, we saw that these are the resources that we need, correct? If we go and now we want to see like what is the relationship, how does things work, right? And this we will see. So this will be a logical flow into the FHIR specification. So if you see the subject of our discussion, right? So we are talking about an encounter, okay? Not one encounter, 2 encounters we were talking, correct? And then the encounter had, during the encounter, you figured out a lot of things. You had understood some observation, like pain in the, observation is elevated temperature, temperature 38 degrees. These are observations that happened during the encounter. A prescription of a medication, amoxicillin 250 mg, happened during the encounter. Right? So an encounter had these particular resources linked, okay? And then the encounter was performed or asserted by certain entities like patient or a practitioner, right? So in this case, if you see the performer, right? So who took the observation or who did the observation, right? So that is where the performer is. An asserter is somebody who says that I have pain, right? Who's asserting that, right? That's the patient, correct? So here we are representing 4 resources primarily. They are condition, observation, medication, and allergies. And we're trying to show you the linkages between the resources, right? When we look at the resources, we'll see like how the linkages are happening through resource references, okay? But this is what it is. Now, suppose we have to represent this encounter into a FHIR document, okay? Now, what is the first thing that we learned in FHIR documents? A FHIR document is FHIR document is a bundle, okay, with type document. That's the bundle level. The first resource in a FHIR document is a composition, correct? So we start with the composition. We start with the composition. Now the composition is recording what? An encounter. So we do an encounter. It has also a patient and a practitioner. They are all related, right? And then you see the relationships that I'm trying to depict from different resources that are part of that particular document and how they are related to the encounter, okay? So this entire thing can be bundled together and be made as an OP consult node. Okay. So that's the idea. So with this, what we do is we get on to the specification, we get on to the FHIR documentation itself and try to navigate these things and try to learn more on the resources. So what I'll do is I'll take a pause for a few minutes. If there are any questions or anything that you want to discuss from the previous sessions, any concerns or comments that you have, let's take those for next 5-10 minutes, and then we get on to the documentation. Okay. So open for questions. I think if somebody is moderating, let me see. Every question has its meaning. I don't know what that is. Thank you for the previous conversation. Very informative for me. All right. So I don't think there are any questions. So if there are no questions, we'll jump to the session, to the FHIR documentation itself. So give me a time. I will just switch. In the meanwhile, I think JP and Arun, if you can answer some of the questions, I'll just flip on the documentation.
Couple of questions in chat.
Why do you need a composition resource here? Question.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. If you are seeing the FHIR documentation now. Okay.
Yes.
Before that, you had a question, right? What was the question? You had a question.
Why do you need composition resource here?
Okay, so if you want to represent or if you want to create a FHIR document, okay, so there are 4 different paradigms that FHIR supports. I think now there are subscription and other paradigms also, like bulk also is a paradigm, but essentially the 4 paradigms are there, right? And in that document is a paradigm. Okay, if you want to capture something as a FHIR document, right, the rule says that the first resource of a FHIR document inside a bundle has to be a composition resource. Okay. Now the composition resource is a special resource because there it's like when you compose a document, what do you have? You have multiple sections, and each section has a special meaning and a special context to it and a content to it, right? FHIR composition resource tries to mimic that, right? So FHIR composition resource actually has sections, and those sections you can say, what does this section mean and what are the data that I want to put in that section, right? So short answer, if you want to represent FHIR, if you want to encapsulate data in FHIR documents, the FHIR documentation rule says, or the FHIR document rule says that the first resource in a bundle for a FHIR document has to be a composition, right? That's why we need a composition resource. Now, the value of composition resource is because it helps you arrange the data in a very, very logical fashion or a presentable fashion. Okay.
And when you were elaborating that encounter, patient, practitioner, all this stuff, resources, you said that there can be some other things as well related to it. What does it mean? Other things means?
Other things as in?
You said that it we not only the resources, there could be other things as well related to the.
No, I said in the resources there could be other resources also.
Okay, got it.
So now let's yeah, go ahead.
Another question is, what is performer and what is asserter? Asserter is the patient and performer is the practitioner.
Yes, we'll see in the documentation. So what I'll do is we will try to learn those things from the specification itself today. Okay. So that these questions, you would know how to get the answer and where to get the answer from, right? All right. So coming to the FHIR specification, hl7.org/FHIR is the page. Everyone has it opened. Please have it opened, and so that you can navigate your own and you can follow this as well. Now, if you see, the current release version is R5. So it always points to the latest released version. Okay. And if you want to go to older versions, right, you can just click on the versions here mentioned here, or you can go to the directory of published versions and find what version you want to, and you can go in there. Okay. So for our sake, we will be, I think we'll be staying with FHIR version R4. Why so? Because R4 is right now the most widely adopted specification. So we'll stay on that. Okay. But for learning purpose, even if we are on R5, doesn't matter. So let's be on R5 then. Okay. Now, if you see here, this is the FHIR documentation. It is arranged in this tabular fashion. Okay. So when you come in here, you understand, right? So the level one, the basic framework, right? The base documentation, XML, JSON, and all these things are given. Then you want to know implementer, what are the implementer supports? So the sections are carved out like that, right? So downloads are available. So they're separate, like you want the specifications. So let's go to the implementer support first. So in the implementer support section, implementers module, you can have various, where is that? Downloads. I don't see the downloads here. Did I move wrong? JP, you see the downloads? Okay, it's here. So I clicked on the downloads. So downloads are here. You can download the FHIR specification itself in various, what do you say? Representation, XML, JSON, RDF, GraphQL. You can have different implementation tools that are already available, right? So those things you can get in from here. You can actually also get a lot of other materials. For example, you can go to.
And lastly, we have downloaded JSON schema.
Yes, that you did in the session 2, right? Where you did the
Yes.
schema for doing that. So all those things are available here. You can download it from here. Okay. So downloads are here. There are also tools and other things that can be downloaded from here. Now let's go to the implementer support that we came in here, right? So here, for example, you want to know as an implementer, right? What are the validation? How do I do validation of resources? You can click on there and you can read common uses, example scenarios, all these things that to get started, right? You want to get onto, you can just get a know of it or get a hang of it, right? Without even going into the details of it, right? So that's how you can think of. Clinical examples are there. Now, after that, you want to understand what is the FHIR security and privacy, what are the resources available, what is the guidance of security and privacy from FHIR. You can just go into this section. Conformance. You know, conformance is an important section in FHIR, right? Or important topic in FHIR. Why? Because just implementing FHIR does not make you interoperable. You guys understand that, right? And can somebody tell me why am I saying that? That just implementing FHIR may not make you interoperable. A quick comment or a chat response, if somebody can.
There was a question previously, like this resource is being supported by FHIR and that resource is also being supported by FHIR, but those both are not compatible to each other.
Yeah, why? Anyone wants to take a crack at it? Any?
You got an answer in chat. FHIR can be changed according to the need of the organization.
Sabina, can you explain a little bit? What does it mean?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
The FHIR resources, they can be changed according like how the organization they need. Like they will formulate or they will modify according to their needs. So they may not be interoperable. One organizations may not have the same resources allocated to the module as the other organizations.
Partly correct. I mean, so you are there, but not exact term that I was looking at. But thanks for giving that. Anyone else who wants to try? Norman, you want to try?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, please.
FHIR is more generic, and a lot of flexibility is actually given on FHIR. If you take any resource, patient resource, a lot of attributes on the patient resources are not mandated. It's all optional. But IG's implementation guides actually tell you what to do on those resources.
Very
Even though you actually implement a patient resource, you can send only one or two fields. So so that's what I see it as. Even though you implement FHIR, it may not be interoperable with the other person, and implementation guide is very much required between the two parties.
true. So what you understand, right? So, and what the participants, both you and Sabina, told is like FHIR specification is more of a platform specification, and it's more generic, right? It tries to broadly cover things, right? So it is not very strict. It has for wider use cases, it is like more things are optional, correct? And a lot of things, in fact, are optional. So two implementers can choose to implement different things in FHIR, right? So same patient resource, two different implementers can implement it differently. And then even though they are implementing FHIR, they are conforming to FHIR, still they may not be able to understand each other or extract value of it, right? So that's where conformance resources come into play. What the conformance does is conformance helps you constrain the resources, helps you build profiles. Profiles are nothing but where you get into the more more concrete expression or more concrete expression of the resources, where you limit or constrain the resources so that it works exactly how you want. So for example, the base FHIR resource for patient may not mandate patient name, but in your use case, you want patient name to be always there, right? In that case, what you'll do is you'll put a profile on the FHIR patient resource and make the cardinality of the patient name as one, correct? So those things you can do. And then you can also define or determine, like, as we learned in the terminology session, right? Codes are very important. Terminologies are very important, right? So two systems, if they are using two different terminologies, they still may not be interoperable. So you can constrain the terminologies. You can also extend certain attributes if required, but all those things needs to be documented, and so that the implementers can use it, right? Exactly the way it is intended. So all those things can be done, and the guidance and the resources are provided in the conformance sections, conformance blocks, right? Terminologies you have seen, exchanges, you know, right? And then there are resources, or you can see this where the clinical, diagnostic, medication, those are the arrangements. But this flow, I have not seen many people using it, this kind of a layout. Okay. What people typically do is they get onto the resource types directly. So whenever somebody is getting onto the FHIR, invariably they get onto the resource types tab. And what you find here is a listing of resources, right? And they're arranged in different ways, right? So you can have them arranged as categories. So foundational resources, base resources, clinical resources, financial resources, specialized resources, or you can get them in alphabetical order. I don't know what R2 layout is. By maturity, by security category, by status, and by work group. So work group are special. So in HL7 organization, there are work groups, and those work groups are responsible for certain workflows and certain resources that are to be defined, right? So that's where you can see by work groups. So if you see here, for example, clinical decision support is a work group, community-based collaborative care is a work group, FHIR infrastructure, financial management, these are different work groups who are working on these particular resources. Yeah. GP, you wanted to add something? You're on mute.
I think we are good. Mostly like you use that categorize, right? That gives a proper sense, like which one is clinical, which one is a financial category. That helps better.
Sure. And please feel free to join in Arun, Silva, JP, as and when you feel you can add more context to things. Okay. The idea is more like helping people navigate the standard.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now what we do is we go to the category view. Okay. So we see the categories and we take one resource. Okay. So let's take so before this, let's do this on the documentation. This is another view that you should be familiar with. Okay. You click on documentation. This is the view. Okay. In this view, what you see is, you see like if you're adopting FHIR, what are the things that you should know? For example, what is profiling, what is implementation of obligations, and so on and so forth. Security and safety, implementation advice, mappings, okay? And then if anything that you want to get deeper into, right? So what are FHIR documents, what are messaging? So you can go in there, okay? And here, if you see, if you want to understand the background, you can just go in here, you can click on the summary page and you can understand. There is an overview also for developers, generals, clinicals, architects. So depending on what you align to and what you are familiar with, right? If you want to understand FHIR from your perspective, that's a good starting point, right? You can understand, like if you are a developer, right? In your language, they try to explain FHIR. If you're a clinician, in a clinical language, and so on and so forth, right? Now let's go into resources. So what we'll take is, we will take an encounter resource because that's what the resource that we discussed. So let's take an encounter resource. Where will the encounter resource fall? Let's find out.
Under management.
Where is management?
Above. Yes, last one.
This
Workflow, then management.
Yeah. So in the management, let's go to encounter. Okay. So this is a typical layout of any resource. Okay. Any resource page, you will find this layout. Okay. The first thing is it will give you a baseline understanding of what the resource is intending to do. Right. So this is the first thing that you should read to figure out what this resource will do. Right. So this resource, an interaction between a patient and a healthcare provider for the purpose of providing healthcare practice, right? Encounter is primarily used to record the information about the actual activities that occurred, right? So that's when you are doing an OPD encounter or anything to record where a patient and a provider are interacting. The first resource that we choose is an encounter resource, right? Then you get into the scope and usage where they define more detail of where to use, what to use, right? And then status management, boundaries and relationships are fine. You can read it. Now, the other thing that we jump typically into is to see like, what does the resource contain? What are the attributes in the resource, right? Okay. So if you see the structure of this resource, okay. So this is an encounter. Encounter resource is a domain resource. Now, what is a domain resource? Okay, that's a good question that you should ask. And if anyone can explain me, that's better. Otherwise, I'll explain. So try it out. You all have the page open, right? You can figure it out also yourself. Any volunteers to try? No one daring enough to try? Or no one interested enough to try? Okay, somebody has written. Okay, domain resource is the skeleton on which other resources are built. Good. Domain resource is the parent resource for key resources. Good. But if you click on the domain resource type, so here, in the structure, you have the name of the attributes, you have the flags, you have the cardinalities, and you have the type. So type is a domain resource. If you click on the domain resource, you see domain resource is of type resource. Okay. So that means that the base of domain resource is a resource, correct? So it's more of an, what do you say, parent-child relationship, right? So resource is the base, okay? Okay, so this is the basic resource. In a basic resource, you have ID, meta, implicit rules, and language. Okay, so these are the things that are there in the base resource. Okay. Now, a domain resource implements or is a child of what do you say, resource, right? So it's what it means. It has all the attributes that resource has, plus it has extra attributes: text, content, extensions, and modifier extensions. So these are the things that are not defined in the base. This is something that the domain resource has defined, right? So now, since all other resources, the clinical resources, are domain resource, they will inherit all the things that were there in resource, plus the extra things that are defined in domain resource. Understood? So that's why if you go in back, you see encounter does not have any meta. It doesn't have any ID in the attributes. But still, when we talk, we say like the resource has an ID, resource has a meta, right? Because those things are inherited from the ancestors. Okay. So understood that, right? So domain resource is an inherited resource, or domain resource inherits from resource, and all the clinical resources, majority of them, I think apart from bundle, binary, and few other resources, right?
Yeah, I think only 3 resources are inherited from base resource, BBP, right? Bundle binary parameter.
Right.
Rest all of them are, inherited
domain
from
resource.
domain resource. Yeah.
So that's another thing that you should understand, right? And that could be an exam question also. So again, you understood domain resource, and you understood, right, that resources are hierarchical in nature, right? There is a parent, there is child, relationship is there. Okay. So that's an important thing that you understand. The second thing, every resource has a flags thing. Resource structure has a flag, cardinality, type. Now you understand what is a type. Type is data type. Okay, type is like from where the code means what is the type of the attribute. Okay, cardinality. What is cardinality? Cardinality is which says the repetition of this particular attribute, right? Whether this attribute is allowed to repeat, and allowed to repeat how many times. Okay, that's what cardinality depicts. Alternatively, you can think of cardinality also depicts whether something is mandatory or optional, mandatory and repeated, optional and repeated. All those things you can understand. Now, if you want to understand what is cardinality, the best thing is just click on card. Okay, you get onto here, where you will understand the definition of what cardinality is. So cardinality means the lower and upper bounds of how many times the element is allowed to repeat, allowed to appear. Correct? The same thing that we discussed. Now, if you see here, something is 0 to start, and I think this is obvious, right? So in the chat, somebody can tell me what is 0 to star, what is 1 to star, what is 1 to 1. And can there be something that is 0 to 0? That's a question. Was 0 to star, none to many, correct. 1 to m, mandatory. 0 to star, use 0 star, Magesh, 0 star use only one time. I think that is wrong. 1 to star, 1 to many, Santosh, right? 0 to 0 can mean what? Okay. 1 to 1 is mandatory. I think you got it. You guys got it. So what is 0 to 0? Will it happen or not happen?
No.
So what the FHIR specification says, you cannot go something which is, we cannot, so something that is, I don't know how to put it, but 0 to 0 is not possible. What it means is that this attribute is not required. If this attribute is not
0 to
required,
0 is that the minimum appearance is 0 and maximum appearance is 0.
what does it mean?
Then
right?
basically it means that it does not exist, right?
Yeah, there is no use of having a
It is
field.
not required, right?
Right. But
So,
0 to 0 is
have you seen any implementation of 0 to 0? I'm just thinking of that.
So is it like through profiling we can take out that attribute totally?
Yeah. But I don't know whether 0 to 0 is there or not. You cannot take out the profile totally because you cannot
Base it should be there, right?
Yes, base has. So they can make 0 to 0. I think so. We'll try it out. In the
what I have
hands-on,
seen is 0 to 0
we'll try.
when you write profiles in Excel files, right? So this is some of them use this notation. I have seen it.
So we'll try it out. In the hands-on on the profiling, we'll try out 0 to 0. Okay, so let's try it out. Okay. Now, so this is how it is. Get onto the flags. Now the flags convey special meaning to the attribute. Okay, so if there is some special meaning that is attached to the attribute, that's where the flags come in. Okay, so TU means what? I think if you click on it, you'll come to know. Oh, it's already shown here, trial use. Okay. Now this sigma, right? Sigma, if you understand, it's a summary. So we talked about the base narrative, right? Narrative section of a resource, right? If you want to understand what all things should go into the narrative, if you want to automatically generate the narrative, right? So there is a guidance that is given by the FHIR specification itself. Wherever there is a sigma, right? You can think that these things can be part of your narrative section. So when you're creating an automated narrative section in your resource, you can take these sigma things and put in there. It does not say it has to be there. It's a guidance, it should be there. Okay. This is an important one. It says the element is a modifier element. Okay. I'll again go back to the audience and say, what is a modifier element? JP and Arun has not to speak now. Let's see others. So what is a modifier element? You are free to navigate. It's an open book. Okay. By the way, I think we can have an exam on the last day to understand like how much you have understood FHIR, whether our efforts have gone in the right direction or not, right? So we might have an exam. So I'm just putting it there. So be prepared. And we'll see what happens after the exam. But we might have an exam, and the exam results also can be published. Okay. So anyone answering? Okay, modifier element, Akash is saying modifier element which can change the meaning of a resource. Very good. Additional values can be added to the existing list of code. No. Modifier, we can add more elements. No. I think Akash, you were closer. Can you elaborate if you can?
So basically, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it can change the meaning of a particular resource. For example, if the status, if you consider if it is active, then we can say that, for example, patient is an active. I'm giving just an example. Or encounter is an active. It's an active state of that resource, and it is a meaningful one. If it is not active, for example, then we cannot even go further to discuss about that resource. So it is changing the meaning of that resource actually. Same is the case with deceased. So if it is yes, then it is actually changing the way we are representing the patient. If disease is yes, then we will not go further to discuss that patient. So it is actually changing the meaning.
Yeah.
So what does
I think
identifier mean then?
just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. I'll just put a little bit of a clarification. You're like right. All I wanted to say is it changes how you handle the resource in your implementation. That's the right way to put it, right? Means the modifier extension actually modifies the handling, how you are to handle. So for example, how you handle a diseased patient versus an active patient, right? Your handling changes. How you handle, for example, in this case, the status is a modifier attribute. What it means is uh, the value of the status changes the meaning or changes how you are handling that, right? So for example, you will handle a planned encounter differently than an entered in error encounter, right? So a modifier extension definitely changes the meaning of the resource. It also implies to the implementer that you have a special case. You should pay attention to those modifier attributes, and maybe your implementation has to adapt differently. There was a question that somebody was asking, right?
I was asking like he was saying like it is planned in progress. So we will came to know like it is planned or in progress via the identifier, right? For example, the identifier is like if the patient is diseased or if a patient is active, we must have an identifier like which denotes that this patient is like diseased or alive or active. So I was like a bit confused between the
No,
identifier
no,
and the like
no.
this two
Identifier.
things.
I think we defined identifier in session 1, right?
Okay.
Identifier is a business
Business
ID.
identifier.
Business ID means, for example, an MRN number, right? Or
Right.
say social security. That is the identifier, right? An identifier does not does not indicate whether a patient is alive or dead. Correct? It's just an ID, right? MRN number 1234. Right?
Mhm.
Maybe the MRN number is assigned to Satyam, right? So Satyam and 1234. You don't know Satyam is alive or dead, right? For that, you need the diseased flag, correct? Or an active flag,
Right.
right? So
Okay.
that's what the modifier is.
Thank you.
But good question, and that clarifies identifier, use of
Actually, I
identifier.
have not joined the previous session, so I was not clear about it.
That's why we put in this session like this, means where we will have more discussions and we'll have more understanding on the ground itself. So if you have any questions, just pull in, right? Don't be shy. Okay,
Yeah.
Now if I want to know what are the flags available, what will I do? I'll just click on here. Okay. Where are my flags? So these are the flags that are available. Okay. Right. So it's so easy. Means what it means is you don't have to mug up everything. You don't have to get on to understanding everything, right? It's okay if you are understanding the base contours of FHIR. If you're confident of understanding what is the resource, what is the data type, what are the different modifiers, and what are the meaning. Means you don't have to exactly know what a modifier element exactly means, as long as you know what it intends to, right? You don't need to know all the flags, but you know that flags have convey special meanings, right? So on and so forth, right? So that will help you navigate the specification better in terms of your implementation. And that's the idea. I don't think any one of us would have read 100% of the specification, but we are confident enough that given any problem, we will figure it out because we know how to read the specification, where to figure out what, correct? And that is where we want everyone to be, right? Everyone should be as capable as what we are, right? In terms of having the confidence of being able to figure out, right? And if you are able to do that, I think our sessions are successful. Okay. All right. So you understand the flags, you understand the cardinalities. Okay. Now data types we did talk, and there was a question that came in that time. Yes, somebody has a question.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do we have that ABDM session recording on?
Your voice is breaking, not very audible.
Do we have the ABDM session recording on Zulip?
It's not yet there. I will publish it today. It was done on Thursday, right? Yeah, it was done on Thursday. I think Friday I did not get time, so I was traveling whole day. I'll do it today after this. Maybe we'll publish both the sessions today together. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So you understood this, right? And this is how. So if you want to understand any data type, you can just click on it and you go back. Now there was a terminology session that Dr. SBB had, right? And it talked about terminologies, correct? That session recording is also there on Zulip. Now my question is, tell me the difference between code, codable concept, code and codable concept. Anyone can try and give me an example also. You can take, so there are examples that you can take it from here, right? There are examples here, right? You can use that. But give me what is a code, what is a codable concept? Because that is important, you know, when you're talking about performance.
We still have a lot of questions around that coding, codable concept.
So let's clarify that. Yeah, that is important.
I can give an example of code. Like when we bid for a project, the reference number or the project number or the tender number is a code. And codable concept, like for PIN code or postal code or zip code. When I'm saying my postal code is 700131, so the concept behind PIN code or postal code, it gives a number. That is a concept.
Then what is an identifier? You said if tender number is a code, then what is an identifier?
Identifier. But identifier, you said that it is a business identifier. It can be an ID as well.
I think, Satyam, before we start with code, we should understand the difference between ID and identifier.
Code is like a defined
coding.
Code is like a defined by the terminology system. Like we can use like SNOMED.
If somebody is speaking, if you can take your name or come on video, it will be easier for me to identify like who is this. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Please go ahead. I did not intend to stop you.
Yeah, a code is like they're using like SNOMED values. It has a specific terminology system which is universally used, that particular code, to identify that particular disease or that particular whatever it is. Like it is a universal code which is accepted throughout. That is what a code is.
Okay, what is a codable concept?
It's like a broader term. It encapsulates the coding.
So I'll let Dr. SBB know that his session was not taken seriously. Anyways, jokes apart, sorry. We did not mean it, just wanted to keep it light. So what we'll do is, I think data types is important. When you're coding or when you're implementing, data types are important. So what we'll do is like, we'll go through the important data types, okay? So as Arun mentioned, like we'll start with identifier and ID, okay? So what is an ID? If I click on ID, where did the ID go? Okay. So ID is of type ID. And if you go to ID, where is ID? So ID is basically a string, okay? So ID is a string, okay? And it's, so this is the data type ID, okay? ID is just a string. That is the data type of ID. And it is like a, you can go till 64 characters. So that's the ID. Now, what is ID? So ID, the attribute ID is defined as the logical ID of the artifact. What it means is, on your FHIR server, okay, on your resource server, you will have a physical location, right, of that particular resource, correct? That location's address, the last address, right, last bit of it, right, is the ID. So you can think of it as the primary key in your database. For example, patient MRN1234 Satyam, right? That is the patient MRN1234 Satyam, right? And Arun will be 345, right? And JP is a doctor, so he will not be a patient. Suppose these two guys are there, right? Now in the database, my number is 1 and Arun's number is 2. Okay. So our ID is 1 and 2. Okay. ID 1 on the server means Satyam, ID 2 on the server means Arun. Okay. Whereas our identifier is our MRN number. MRN number will be the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. Even if you go on a different server, now what can happen is Arun can go first and he can be taking the first record in the database. I can be taking the second record in the database. So IDs will change in the second server, right? If there are two servers, depending on when the record was created in that particular server, the IDs can change because that is the physical location of the primary key. But the identifier is the business thing, right? Which you identify as a business, MRN number, social security number, Aadhaar number, right? These do not change. Okay. So that's the difference between identifier and ID. I'll come back to identifier in detail, but you understood what is an ID. ID is a string which can be 64 characters long. It is to represent your physical address on the server, which you can think of it as a primary key or whatever you want to think. It's internal to your server. Okay, that's the ID.
Just add a few sentences, it may help.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
An identifier is something that is usually printed in one or more physical documents. Okay, that is what an identifier is. A medical record number is printed in a receipt or an invoice or something like that. An ID is never printed. An ID is only used for electronic communication, right? But for business communication, either in letters or physical documents, identifiers are used.
Okay, so ID is more like internal to you, and MRN number and other things are identified. So now coming to identifier data type. So first, identifier is, right, what we explained so far. Identifiers are certain things that are known to the business. They are in your common exchange things, right? Like your social security. Let's not take social security number. Let's take Indian context. PAN card, right, is an ID, right? Aadhaar card is an ID. Aadhaar number is an ID, right? Aadhaar card is so not an ID, identifier. These are all identifiers. Now, one person can have more than one identifier, correct? You can have Aadhaar number, you can have PAN number, you can have Aadhaar number, right? On the server, you'll have only one ID, right? Because all these things are stored internally on the server, right? Now, one more thing I wanted to show you. See, ID also is not mandatory attribute. So what it means is, okay, first I'll ask you a question. When you say, so we are contradicting here, okay? We are saying ID is the physical location or the primary key in your server, correct? The first statement we did. Second statement we are saying is ID is not mandatory as per the FHIR specification, right? Now, can you give me a use case of both? Both are valid statements, right? Both appear to be contradicting, right? Now, can somebody justify these two statements?
When creating a new patient, we will construct a resource. We don't know the physical ID because it's not created yet. So we'll be sending without ID, and system will create the ID and assign and give it back to us.
Very good. Very good. So you understood, right? So IDs are optional in case you are creating a resource, right? When you're creating the resource, you don't know the ID because ID is something generated by the system, right? So in that kind, when you are sending the resource, ID will be blank. But when you're fetching the resource, ID will be there because now the server has an ID that is there. Okay. Identifier, I think we have discussed more. What we will give you an assignment is go read up identifier. Tomorrow's session, we might we might have an example on identifier also. Okay.
So there may be one quick question.
Please go ahead.
So is the ID is unique for the entire server, or for example, in database?
For the server. For the server.
For the server, okay, because
Yes.
it's a element of the resource, so it should be unique for the entire.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Satyam, I think there is a, I would say it could be resource specific, right? Like patient resource can have an ID 123.
Yes,
Again,
yes.
again, another resource can have 123, but it is like patient slash 123, practitioner slash 123, like
So
that.
it's a, yeah, to I think JP has qualified. It's a more like at a type level, right? Type level, you can have unique IDs, right? Okay. So that type, that ID will be unique in the server. Okay. So
So
patient
when we
123.
say patient slash 123, that means the resources signifies patient. And
Yes,
when we say practitioner slash 123, that means the resource is the practitioner.
definitely. Yes, you have got it. Okay. And these 123 will be different, and that you will, because now you see the physical location is changing. The slash is patient slash 123, encounter slash 123. The address is changing, right? So as long as you can have this unique, you're fine. Okay. So coming back, code, important one. So assignment 1, right? So you guys have to understand, like come back with an understanding of identifier. Another assignment is, because now we will get into the assignment board, because now we are getting to the fag end of the sessions. Go through meta. Meta is a very important attribute. Okay. Go through meta, understand what are the attributes of meta and where meta is used. Okay. That is one exercise plus identifier. So these two is an exercise that you should be ready with. Maybe we'll have quiz tomorrow. We can just create a quiz. That quiz can start on the start of the session. We'll have that quiz. Go through meta and go through identifier. Okay. Now we'll go to code. Okay. Code we covered last week, right? Code signifies, so something that you want to specify as a code, right? Means code is what? For example, these are all codes. Code is a string, right? Code is a string. It's like some key and value. That's a code. Okay. Codes are fixed. Codes are fixed strings, right? So code can have only be certain number of enumeration from which you can choose. So let's go to the code data type now and see what exactly the FHIR specification says. Where is code? Where is code? Where is code? Okay. Code indicates that the value is taken from a controlled string defined elsewhere. As we said, like it's a defined thing from where you can choose. Okay. Technically, a code is restricted to a string which has at least one character and no leading or trailing white space. So a code can be as small as A, B, C, means A, B, or 1, 2, anything can be a code, right? Okay. Now, code is something that has been defined already. So remember that. A code is something, a list of values that has been already defined and you just choose from there. Okay. Its XML data type is token and all, it's a JSON string. So that's code. So if you have, so for example, active, here is status, right? Status is a code because you can choose status from this list that is there, right? And here you see a binding of required. Okay. Since we are talking about code and since we are talking about terminologies, let's talk about what is a binding strength and what exactly this encounter status and required means. Okay. So for any attribute, okay, if you have a value set defined, okay, value set is what? Value set is a set of values from which you can choose. Okay, that's a value set. So for any given attribute, if a value set is defined, that value set can be marked as required, example, preferred, or extensible. Okay. When a value set or when an attribute has a required marked against it in the value set, it means that that attribute's value can only be from here. You cannot put in any other value. Okay. So for example, status. Give me a random status, status is late. For example, you want to put late as a status, okay, for encounter or something. You cannot do that. Why? Because its binding is required. Okay. So, and this entire thing, this entire list of code is part of the value set that is called as encounter status. Okay. So if you go to the encounter status, each of the code has a meaning. So you can choose from here. If something is not applicable to you, means you are not finding a fit in this particular lists, still you cannot use it. Okay. So that is what required means. Required means you have to put a value that is defined here, nowhere else, defined in the value set. That is required. When we come to other value set bindings, we'll discuss that. Any questions? Is required clear?
If I say gender, the value set is male, female, and other, right? So I need to choose within among these values, one of the value, like male or female or other. So that is required. That means mandatory.
Correct.
No, other way, like if the binding strength is required, you do not have the option to choose anything from anywhere else. From that set only you have to specify.
Choice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So you cannot. So you, for example, people complain like, I want transgender, I want something else, right? Those are the things that people say that they want to choose, right? But if it is not in the value set, you cannot choose.
That will
Options
not come
are
in the drop down. That will not come in the drop down.
that should not come in the drop down. Yes. If you want to use transgender, FHIR allows you to have an extension and put it that way, but base FHIR will not. Means if you're just implementing base FHIR, if you're saying you're just implementing patient gender, then your drop down should not have transgender in that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further question on required values, required and required binding and code? Is the code clear now? What is a code?
Yep.
Okay, fine. Now let's go to codable concept. Okay. So, and see, remember, whenever there are modifier extensions, right, you should also pay attention to their cardinality, right? Modifier attributes and cardinality. They have, means you should pay attention to both. Sometimes there are like attributes who are modifier attributes and who might be optional. So chances are there. We'll see if it comes through. I'll let you know. Now coming to codable concept. Class as an attribute is of type codable concept. What does it mean? Okay. So for that, what we need to know is what is a codable concept. So we'll start with that. So click on codable concept. Okay. So codable concept is a data type. Okay. It has two attributes, coding and text. Okay. Coding is 0 to star and text is 0 to 1. Okay. What it means is codable concept is an data type, is a complex data type. So any data type which is not primitive is a complex data type, right? So codable concept is a complex data type. You can think of that. And then this data type has defined two attributes, coding and text. Now, if you see here, coding also is a data type that is there. It's not a elementary data type. Means it's not the primitive data type. It's not string or anything else. It means that we have to see what is coding. So if you click on coding, and you know the hierarchical nature of the FHIR, right? So it's like parent-child inheritance is there, right? So here, coding means in coding, you can have a system, you can have a version, you can have a code, you can have a display, you can have a user selected. Okay. Now, if you're designing a UI, correct? And suppose you are designing a UI and you want to have options for code selection, right? These are the attributes you can think of putting in. Now, a codable concept is an data type which has coding and a text. Coding can have system, code, display, user selected, and these are all can have, means they can be empty. Okay. Now, what it means? What it means is a codable concept, an attribute which is defined as a codable concept can have codes from multiple systems. Okay, multiple systems. So let's take an example. Class is not that great example. I'll take an example which is more easier to understand. Let's take an example of diagnosis. Okay?
Yeah, diagnosis.
Condition and diagnosis. So for example, diagnosis is a
lab order is easier because lab
result, right?
Lab order. So you have a CPT code and you have a line code.
Same thing. I mean,
yeah.
So, observational.
Yeah. So let's take an example of diagnosis so that we just relate it. So in diagnosis,
same page which we are on, right? It had a nice example, one SNOMED example. Whatever concept.
Where?
Yes, same thing. If you open it, yeah,
yes.
here you can see this thing.
Yeah. So now if you see here, so suppose there is a term, so that attribute can be represented in more than one system, correct? You can choose to use a codable concept, right? In a codable concept, you can have one or more codings. A coding will have a system, right? So here, this particular attribute, whatever is the attribute, has two different codings. So the same attribute value can be represented in two different coding systems, having two different values. Code is the value, right? Last but not the least, right? If you see in the codable concept, there is a text, right, which is outside of coding, which means that if you want to specify, right, what exactly does it mean, right, in a textual form, right? Means you can confuse the user with multiple codes, multiple systems, right? But finally, you want to give them something that they can understand, right? So the text can help you there, right? You can say patient is diagnosed with typhoid, for example, right? You can have a text as typhoid as the diagnosis. Coding can be multiples. You can code in ICD, you can code in SNOMED, you can code in any other system that you want, right? Right? Depending on how many systems you have implemented, if you want to represent, that is where the codable concept you can use. In short, if you want to understand, if an attribute can be represented, if an attribute's value can be represented in more than one system, right? Coding system, or more than one concept you can think of, right? Then you use codable concept, then it is codable concept, okay? Now, a codable concept, if you see here, is of, so class has a value set of encounter class. So what it means is the values that can come in the class are coming from encounter class value set. No one has asked me a question, what is the value set? So I'll not explain that, okay? So it's coming from a value set that is called encounter class, okay? And its binding is preferred, okay? We saw required here and we are seeing preferred here. Now, if you understand English, you will have figured out what it means, right?
Preferred means if you give it well and good, or else it is okay if you do not give it.
Preferred means, if that is the case, then what does, I think you're right. So preferred is more like if you have a choice, if you have an option, you should do this because this is what the preferred is, right? But if you cannot, then it's okay. That's what preferred means, okay? And again, I don't go by my English. You can just read here. Instances are encouraged to draw from the specified codes for interpretive purpose, but are not required to do so to be considered conformant, right? So preferred means the specification is saying use it, okay? It will be good for you to use, but I'm not saying you must use it, right? That's the situation where a preferred is used, okay?
Still, implementers are encouraged to use that value set.
Preferred, yes.
But if they have any other preference, they can. Provides a bit of flexibility to the implementers.
Understood? Now, can somebody explain what is the value set?
Value set is a list of codes with descriptions which can be chosen. It's like your drop-down options in the UI.
right? A little bit more explanation. You're right. Something else that can be added here, something more?
A predefined set of values, and the users must use only the one of the value.
So how is a value set different from a coding system?
Value set is, I mean, like, for example, HL7 gender is a value set which cannot be modified. But I mean, coding system is like terminologies or ICDs, Nomad, where you have a reference which is a publicly available list, and you are providing reference to it because of the number of items or whatever, huge list.
Maybe in a single, little comparison, value sets have a string values. It's a string. Each one of value is a string. But whereas in the coding system, it have code, description.
No, I think that's not understanding. Okay. So see, a value set, right? As the name says, it's a set of values, right? Now, a set of value can come from different coding systems, right? So for example, you want to give users a choice of values, right? A list of values that, as somebody explained, a list of values, right? But this list of values can come from multiple systems, multiple coding systems. Some values you can take from Loink, some values you can take from Snowmed, some values you can take from some other place, right? And together you build a set, right? That can be used, correct? So that's a value set, correct? So a value set is a set of values that can be composed or that can be derived from multiple coding systems, right? So you can get some values from Loink, some values from Snowmed, and still you can create a value set, okay? Whereas a coding system is a pure system, right? So Loink has only codes that are theirs, right? Snowmed has their codes, right? A value set can have a combination of both codes, correct? But essentially a value set is a narrow set which you can use to use for that particular attribute. Okay, that's where value sets are important, right? So it gives you a more, defined choices, right? Or defined list of values that you can work with, correct? That's a value set. Now, let's see the understanding of what value set is, correct? Again, we go here. We go to, where is value sets? Define karo value sets. वो कहाँ गया? Arun, in the meanwhile, you can just talk about, I'll just figure out where the definition of value set is here in the, here.
Okay, one of the things about codable concepts also, and about let me talk about identifiers. When we talk about identifiers are issued by a specific authority. You need to know who is the authority who is assigning. Let's take an example, right? Within India, which is the authority which issues the PAN number?
It's income tax.
It's an income tax department, right? Which is the department that issues the driving license?
Transport Authority. RTO.
RTO, right? Now, if you see the difference between these two, the income tax authority is nationwide. But when you take a driving license, is it nationwide?
No.
If you take out your driving license, by whom is it issued? It would say Karnataka State Transport Authority, right? RTO, Karnataka State RTO, or Maharashtra State RTO, or Delhi State RTO, right? So, although you have driving license as a identifier, okay, it is very important to understand who has assigned this particular number. Similarly, if you take the medical record number, which is the authority which assigns a medical record number? It is the hospital itself. Now, Kumar, you're done?
No, I'm just searching for the definition of
I posted in chat. Sajjan, I posted in chat the link.
Okay, go to the chat. Just a minute. Silva Kumar, right? It's not clickable.
From resources, we can go value set.
Yeah, I'm thinking of going from there only. So just a minute. Let me see.
I went through data. I went to data types menu and searched for value set. That led to
yeah, I think so. That explains that there are multiple ways through which you can go in there. It's all clickable, right? But sometimes it can get confusing. So that's another thing, right? That's why you should pay attention. So now, resource of a value set. So value set is a resource. Okay, so that's the first thing that you understand, right? So now, a value set resource instance specifies set of codes drawn from one or more code systems intended for use in a particular context. Correct? So that's what we exactly meant, right? So that it's a context-specific set of codes that you can derive, which you can use for a specific given attribute. Okay, so that should be good enough. So that's a value set. Preferred you understood. Codable concept you have understood. There was a question from Arjun. If codable concept is so flexible, why are we going to use? What was the question from Arjun? Then what is the necessity of code given the codable concepts are more flexible? Correct. A good question. We prefer simplicity. Right? So if something can be done simply, why to complex? Why to make it complex? Right? So that's number one. The second thing is when you're defining the code, right? You're not defining the code system, correct? You're not specifying the code system, right? You're just saying the code attribute and the code, right? You're not specifying the code system, as Arun pointed out, right? Identifier has assigning authority, right? So assigning authority in the coding parlance, the naming system is the guy, the lying or snowman and all, right? When you're using code, you're not bothered about all those things. You're saying active, true, status is entered in error, right? You don't need to define too many complex things, right? That's why code has its own place, right? For things that can be straightforward with strings, where you don't need to specify the coding system and all, you should use. That's where the code is being used. And always remember, FHIR, and this is my interpretation, FHIR is always implementer friendly, and it is trying to make things simpler, right? So we will always lean towards making things interoperable and simpler, right? So code has its own place. Again, there can be better rationale to it, better judgment, better description why it is. I'll leave it to you if you guys find something better which explains this rationale. We will all be happy to hear that and then improve our knowledge. Correct? But that's my understanding. Now we were there where we were at encounter, right? So you see, like if you're just taking these things, right? So how difficult or how easy it is to navigate, right? So it's already 1.5 hours, and we are still not gone into more than 4 attributes of encounter. But at least hope that you are getting clear with the concepts, because that is more important.
I have one question. Sorry to interrupt. Beside every resource, there is a number 4, encounter 4, then patient 5. Why?
You figure it out and tell me. You get 5 minutes for that. In the meanwhile, we are proceeding. And you know how to figure out, right? You just click on that. Okay. Figure it out. I'll ask you the question. This is Sonia, right?
Yes.
So you will get the question back in 5 minutes. Okay. But the idea here is how do you get to figure out yourself? That's the intent. It's not to embarrass you, but more to make sure that you can figure it out on yourself. Okay, coming back. So we have understood codable concept, we have understood flags, we have understood. So now there's another value set with a binding example. So for example, this priority is an attribute in encounter, which is of type codable concept. You know what it is. But I'm seeing a new thing called as example here. Okay, so I have already seen required, I have seen preferred. Now I'm seeing example. Correct? Guess what is it? Yeah, I think your guesswork will be good enough. You don't need to read the definition. Anyone? I think it's example. Okay, if you're, I think somebody's putting in the chat. Okay, so what we will do is we'll go to the example. Okay. Instances are not expected or even encouraged to draw from this specified value set. You get the difference between preferred and example, right? In preferred, you are encouraged to use that particular value set. In example binding, you are not at all asked to use it. It's just for example. Okay. Understood that, right? Now, anything else? Now there is a new data type that has come as codable reference. Okay. So this is a new data type that has come. Okay. So what is it? Okay. So codable reference is a special data type. Okay. Let's go and look at it. Okay. So codable reference by class or instance. Codable reference has a concept, a codable concept, and a reference. Okay. So that's what it is. So where is the example for this? I think this I'll put it as an, I think this should be an exercise. We will again have a question on this tomorrow, right? So you can have an understanding of codable reference. What is a codable reference? Okay. We have understood already codable concept. I will tell you what is a reference, and then you can figure out what is a codable reference. That will be a question for tomorrow. So far 3 questions have come. Meta, that you'll have to remember. Then we had identifier that you have to remember. The third one is codable reference. So 3. So just keep in mind, I'm not forgetting. So the quiz will be there. Okay. So codable reference is a data type that we should figure it out. Now subject is another data type, reference. And then there is a bracket, it says patient or group. Okay. So patient or group related to this encounter. So the attribute meaning is clear. The meaning is the subject is this attribute subject means it denotes a patient or a group related to an encounter, right? Now, what is a reference? So reference is actually you are referring to a different resource. So for example, patient is already created in your system, right? Now you are just putting the reference to that patient here in the subject, right? It could be just a name and so patient /1234 as a reference, right? So you're just putting the reference here and saying that the subject of this encounter, please refer here. This is this patient, right? That's what the reference means. Reference again is a complex data type, which means that it has some attributes that you should be knowing. Reference data type has a reference where you can put the string like patient /1234. Type is like class, right? Means whether it is patient or group or anything, right? So that you can put in. Identifier, if you want to put the logical ID, you can put it, and display, you can put it. So that's the identifier data type. Essentially, identifier data type is referencing a resource that is there on your server or somewhere else, which you can reference in your particular resource. That's where reference data type is used. Okay. And all the things. So these iconography, right? So you see different icons here, right? If you are like a more visual person, right? You can figure out a lot of things by these icons also, right? Each of these icons have a meaning, right? Again, you know how to get the meaning, right? Where to look for the definition. Just click on that, you'll go there. Okay. So now you can see like all this outward arrow looks like it means a reference. You can just check and validate that. Okay. Now we see a new thing that is coming up is C. Okay. So far we had seen sigma, we had seen modifier attribute, we had seen a lot of data types. Now here we are seeing C. Can somebody throw some light on what is C? Okay. So in fact, JP has mentioned that references can be thought of foreign key references also in database terms. So if you're referring to databases, foreign keys can be references.
Yeah,
Good
that's
one.
the closest analogy I could think of,
Good one. Okay.
C is
So
for constraint.
C is for constraint. Nice. What does that
Limitation,
mean?
a restriction.
Yes. So if you see here at the end of the resource definition, right, what happens is constraints are defined. Okay. And constraints, there are rules that are defined here. So for example, where was the constraint that we saw? Participant had a constraint, right? And the rule is a type must be provided when no explicit actor is specified. A type cannot be provided for a patient or a group of actors. So when you are putting in participant as an attribute, value of participant, right? These rules needs to be followed. Okay. And that's where the C comes. C is the constraint. Okay. So this attribute has a constraint, and the constraint is defined as the rule. When you are using that, when you are populating that particular attribute, you have to follow the rules that are there. Okay. Then find anything else that you're seeing here. That is a reference we have seen. Period. Period is another data type which is important. It's an instant of time, right? So start time, end time. If you want to denote that, you use period. Okay, date time, duration, codable reference. I think we have covered most of them. We have covered. Now let's take an example of encounter. Where do you find examples? There is a tab called examples. Okay. And let's take an example of the real world example, JSON. Let's take this. Okay. So here, if you see, so this is an encounter resource. The ID is F201. That is the encounter ID. Now again, remember ID is the internal ID, the server ID, correct? Whereas the identifier is the business identifier, right? This is what will be used in their normal discussions, correct? Status is completed. So as we have seen, status is a code, correct? Status is of type code. So the attribute and the value that is completed, correct? Now class, if you have seen class, right? I think I have to open it in a different page, I guess. This one and
It is
examples.
completed. Does it mean like the doctor-patient interaction is done? That means that is the status completed. Does it mean that?
Good question. Do you want another task? Okay. I'll tell you how to figure that out. See. So what does that mean? Completed means. So if you go to the value set here, right? If you go to the value set here, things are defined. Okay. When you are putting a completed, it means the encounter has been
ended.
So never ever guess. Okay. Because sometimes what happens is codes might be similar. You think that you know, right? But always confirm, right? When you're implementing some things, right? Always confirm what exactly it is. What is the meaning of it? And it's given in the value sets, given in the definition. But you guessed it right. Completed means the encounter is completed. Okay. Now you see here, status is code. So that's why in the encounter, it's direct. Status is equal to completed attributes. Whereas if you see here, class is a codable concept, right? Now how they have implemented class. So they have put class attribute under that coding because codable concept has a coding attribute. Under that, there is a system. Under that, there is a code. There is a display. Correct? So this is how you implement a codable concept. And if you have multiple
But what
codings,
about text? Text is not here.
which text?
Coding system and then text.
Things are optional, right? Everything is an optional, right?
Okay.
So the attribute of codable concept, right? You have coding and text, right? That is optional.
Okay.
Correct. Now priority is defined, consultation is defined, everything is defined. Now this is a reference. Okay. So how you define a reference? So subject, we remember subject is like referring to a patient or a group, right? So how you define? You put a string where you say like this is the location of the patient on this particular server. Okay. So whenever you have this kind of a, which is not complete URL, right? It means that this particular resource exists in your server. This is the assumption. Okay. So whenever you are just having patient/F201, right? It means that this particular patient is referring to the base URL of your server, right? So you, for example, your server is myserver.com/FHIR is my base URL, right? So where this patient will remain is myserver.com/FHIR/patient/F201. That's where this FHIR patient will exist. Okay. And display, they have put as Royal, the name of the patient. Okay. And so on and so forth. So this is, you understood, right? Now what we will do is we can take this resource, we can construct this resource. Okay. We can actually construct this resource. Already Arun had shown how to construct a resource, correct? And now you have already seen like what does construction of resource take, right? You have to understand, because remember when you're doing the Sunday exercise, right? You guys were getting confused. Ki, abhi coding mein kya karna hai? What is next to be done? Human name. How is Arun guessing that there will be final family name and use suffix, right? How is he putting those? Those things are all defined, right? So those things are all defined in the data types, right? So if you see that, you will be able to generate those resources. All right. Now, I think we have been able to navigate a particular resource. So far, the resource definition we have covered. Go through it. If you have any questions, we have still 2 more weeks to go. You can ask those questions in the discussion forum. We can get it answered. Now, everything that we discussed, if you want to get in details, it's listed below. Example usage is there. Okay. When to use encounter, how to use encounter. This is important. Okay. Remember, if you see, if I think of a FHIR resource, a FHIR resource typically contains the data. Okay. And also the what all things you can do with that resource, right? So a resource has both representation. It has, first is what the content of the data, content of the resource, and also what are the operations that are profited on those resources. Important one is search parameters. Now, for example, if you're implementing encounter as a resource on your FHIR server, okay? Even if you're not implementing, suppose you're not, your job is not to implement a FHIR server, right? You are a client, you are a consumer, okay? You want to query a particular server and perform some searches, right? Now, you can't do random searches. You can't do any search that is random. You need to know what are the search parameters available, right? So the first class is like the search parameters can only, for encounter, the search parameters can only be in this given range. Okay, so these are the search parameters that are allowed for encounter resource. Okay, there are some search parameters which are common across all the resources, like _ID, _count, and all these things are there. But encounter specific, these are the search parameters. You know, when you're implementing account, it will search for value in the encounter.account and so forth. The search parameter name will be date, which actually points to encounter actual date, actual period. Okay. Now, you are not required to implement all these search parameters, and neither are the other partners, servers, right? And that's where conformance resource that Arun showed that day. You remember he showed metadata. right? He showed like you can go to the FHIR server/metadata and you download the capability statement first, right? When you download the capability statement, what are the things that you look at it? You look at the capability statement saying like, what are the, means first, what is the paradigm it is supporting? If you're doing /metadata, it mostly means you're supporting REST paradigm, right? The next thing you see is what are the resources you are supporting, right? And suppose you get the resource list as encounter in the supported list. The next thing that you see is what are the operations that guys are supporting, right? Create, reread, update, and all these things, right? The important thing that also will be defined in the capability statement that you can see is the search parameter it supports. So of all these search parameters, maybe your server implements only 5 of them, right? So you can't say that, okay, the FHIR specification has defined 20 parameters, but you're supporting only 5. So you're wrong, incompliant. No, whatever they're supporting, they're publishing that, right? So they're fully compliant. As a client application, my goal is to get the data using whatever they have published as a specification, okay? This is a guidance when you are trying to use resources. So for example, somebody has said like, I will be using length as a search parameter. Now you want to know what exactly is length, because they are not going to define in the capability statement what exactly is the length, right? You can come here and see, okay, length means actually it is searching on the encounter.length, correct? And that's how you can do it. Now, this is where I will pause, okay? So we will pause here for today. So what we did today was, we went through one resource. We understood like how to read a resource structure. And then again, the same thing is represented in different specifications. If you like UML, you can see here. In the UML, it gives you a pictorial diagram, which I like is, what are the references? What are the external resources that it is referring to in a pictorial form, okay? And if you go on the top, you can find some examples, detailed descriptions, mappings. So mappings are again like mapping to different standards. Okay, fine. And search parameters, again, the entire list is here. Profiles. So profiles. So suppose there are certain profiles, standard profiles that are defined on that particular resource, right? They will be listed here, okay? Extensions. Now, these extensions are called as standard extensions. So you have the base resource that is there, and then HL7 itself has defined some extensions, right? So the guideline is if you are using or if you are thinking of using any particular extension. So suppose you see this encounter resource and you find that maybe release date is not there. Suppose I'm just taking this extension called release date. Or let's take example, a nice one. Okay. Mode of arrival, maybe that's good. He came by ambulance or something like that, right? Mode of arrival, right? Now, you think that mode of arrival is important in encounter, right? But in the base, it's not defined, correct? Now you want to have this data. So your obvious choice is you are going ahead and implementing a extension. Now, before you are defining an extension, your job is to first search the extension registry, okay? So the first place where you should search is the standard extensions to figure out whether the extension is already defined or not. Okay, this will save you from the headache of defining an extension and publishing an extension. Because when you're defining an extension, you should also publish that extension so that others can find it. Okay, so that's where the use of standard extensions. And then R4 conversion is like, so what this specification also provides, if you're going from previous standard to next standard. So for example, R4 to R5, right? What are the changes that are made? So R4 encounter and R5 encounter, right? What are the changes? Those things are defined in here. Okay, R4 conversions. Okay. This is resource specific. If you need everything, I think there is another place where you can get all the changes that were done between R4 and R5. That is also a place. All right. So we have come here. So there was a question that I had put it back to Sonia. Did you figure out the numbers, Sonia?
I found out in Google. It says
Yeah.
I took an example of consent too. See, like beside consent resource, there is a number written as 2. Okay, it says tracking changes in consent can be managed in 2 possible ways. Submitting changes to the consent resource and tracking the changes via a versioning server. So that is what I got as a
Okay.
result.
So first of all, you should not go to Google if you are on FHIR page. Okay. Now, which number are you talking here?
Consent, if you go to resource consent, beside consent, there is a number 2 is written.
Let's go to where is consent.
It should be above.
Okay, so here is consent.
Yes.
Okay, so this number is there, right? If you just hover on that, you get the thing.
Maturity level.
It's maturity level, right? Now you want to know what is maturity level, right?
Yes.
This we briefly defined also in session 1, right? So this is the maturity level 1. So maturity level 2, right? That is FM2, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this artifact, the meaning of that is that artifact has been tested and successfully supports interoperability among at least 3 independently developed systems. So what it says is, if a resource has a maturity level of 2, it means that at least 3 independent systems have implemented it and tested it among themselves, right? It is not yet in production. It is used with semi-realistic data and in some connectathon and all. That's all, right? Now, that's a good thing to know. If you go by maturity, you will know which resource falls here, right? So level 2, right? Level 2 was consent should be here, right? Or level 2, right? Where is consent? Or it is in level 1?
It's their level 2.
Level 2, right? Where it is?
Yeah, under communication request, you can see.
Communication request.
Okay. So you can also see by levels, right? So that layout is also given, right? So coming back, the numbers here denote the maturity level of the resource. The higher the number, the more mature the resource is. Okay, that's the like if you want the thumb rule, right? Higher the number, more mature the resources. If somebody is denoted as N, it means it is balloted, it is done deal, means it's a normative standard, right? From here, backward compatibility will be taken care of, right? The specification is under obligation to take care of the backward compatibility, right? Below that, when still the standard is not normative, till the resource is not normative, you can expect breaking changes. Okay, so means incompatible version changes. So version 3 to R4 to R5, there could be certain incompatible changes in the resources expected. Now there also the thumb rule is, as you go from low to high, right? Chances of having breaking changes go less and less. So at the lower levels, there is more chance because it's more iterative, more people are testing it, it's being defined, right? And as you go maturity level 3, 4, 5, it means more and more people have implemented in production, they are using it, it's more stable, right? So maturity model helps you identify which resource is in what maturity level so that you can also know what development cycle it is in, correct? And it can also help you decide or choose when you can't decide or choose, because if you need a consent resource, you need a consent resource. But at least you are aware of what are the risks that you need to be aware of, right? That's what it is. I don't know what Google said. So did Google say the same thing or it said something else?
No, same thing, but in different language.
Okay, fine. So that's what it is. Okay. So today we covered this. A few other things that I wanted to cover today is there is a Confluence page of HL7. Okay.
Okay.
So this Confluence page typically has more data about, if you want to know about what is HL7, what is work groups, how does it function, what are the different work groups doing. For example, get started with HL7 essentials, right? So this will give you a background of what is HL7 as an org, right? What is its HL7 process, correct? What are work groups, how balloting happens, what is the connector. Those things can, if you want to understand, you can just play this, okay? It's the URL is conference.hl7.org. You go in here, start from here. You see like what are the work groups, what are the accelerators. We'll discuss what are them. So what are the affiliates that are there? HL7 India is also an affiliate, along with other countries who have affiliates, correct? And then different pages define a lot of different thoughts. For example, one question that was there in the session, that practical session, was like, what is the list of tools that are available, and what is the list of FHIR servers that we can test against, right? That was a question that was there. So if I want to figure out what are the list of list of FHIR servers, so all I'll do is, okay. So if you are just doing testing and all, right, you don't need to implement your own FHIR server, host your own FHIR server, right? There are enough and more FHIR servers that are listed in here. Okay, you can just play with any one of these. Okay.
So one of the FHIR server was given at the time of doing the practical. Once we were offline. That happy.fire then slash space add 4.
So that will be here also. I think Arun have given from here only. But these are the list of official. So these are the list of test servers that are published by HL7, right? So what it means is you can rely on them to be more closer to the specifications, correct? So list of FHIR servers are there. So similarly, if you want the list of downloads and all, right, you can come here and you can just take a look at it. Okay. Using FHIR validator. So this is something that we should take a session on. Okay. So suppose you have a FHIR resource. Okay. Suppose you have a FHIR resource. How do you know it is valid? That's number one. The second thing is, how do you know it conforms to a given FHIR implementation guide or a FHIR profile? Something that we should discuss someday during this 2 weeks. Okay.
That resource must come under the 145 resources of FHIR.
No. So FHIR validation means, suppose you have defined, you have put a patient FHIR resource, right? Now, whether the patient FHIR, so you hand coded that patient FHIR resource with Visual Studio Code and all, right? Suppose now whether it is valid or not, that's first thing that you want to check, right? You have to validate that. The second thing is, if you are conforming conformance to say India's FHIR patient profile, right? How do you conform? How do you define? Means how do you test that it is valid? Okay.
There has to be some standard for India.
Yes, against that profile for India.
Against that profile.
So when we are talking about profiling, so we thought of taking profiling also today, but I think the time is up. We'll take it in the next week. So when you're, again, we will not be defining profiles. What we will be doing is we'll be learning how to read profiles, how to understand profiles, how to use profiles. Correct? Because as an implementer, that is more important. Defining profile and all is somebody someday will do somewhere, right? But majority of the implementers are dealing with using profiles, correct? So our focus will be more about using profiles, correct? Whenever we come.
Like in case of extension, you said mode of arrival. If it is there, you can take it from there. But if you should not write it at very first.
You should never. So with standards and interoperability, I think Arun is a veteran in there. He can attest it. Anything that you want to do it on your own, right? you are getting into the non-interoperable zone, right? So you should resist doing anything, what do you say, privately. And before doing that, you should just search enough, right? So that you are not getting into the non-conformance zone. Because as soon as you define your own private extensions, you have a lot of things that you have to follow, correct? You have to define correctly, you have to publish it, it should be accessible. The URL that you are defining, it should be accessible. The rules are getting into there. The last thing.
Let me just add a little bit over there. So again, FHIR is an evolving standard, right? If you compare even FHIR with other, especially V2 standards, you might find that V2 has been implemented in strange ways. You will not even believe if you see the way how V2 has been implemented, right? Now, one of the things that I've understood from the inventors of FHIR is that to ensure that those mistakes are not done again. And that's why extensions are being published. Now, for persons who have come from the V2 world, right, we used to have Z segments. And what the stand Z or Z segments in how we call it in India, right? Z segments, nobody knows how many Z segments are there in the world, right? And there was absolutely no reusability. What does ZAL mean? ZAL in some places has been used as allergies, right? In some places it is called as logical actions. The same segment. So in order to avoid that, the idea is to use try to publish extensions. But however, now this is where again I'm facing it in my own project. They want me to create extensions, but they don't want to publish it. Why? They're saying that this is a particular intellectual property that is for this particular project, and we do not want our competitors to steal this. So Satyam, what is your advice in such case?
I think similar problem we are also facing. We also have application specific extensions, which obviously we don't want to expose to the entire world. I mean, these are like our internal legacy application specific, business specific.
I think guidelines are clear. Means if something that is, means you have to define your what do you say, area of use, right? If it is very limited to your particular use case and it is not going to impact outside, you can very well keep it within your thing. But the thing is, if that extension, for example, if that resource goes out of your domain, right, it goes into a server which wants to understand what is it, right? At that point in time, there will be challenge, correct? As long as you can control it within your sphere of control, and you can say that this particular extension, this particular resource is never going to travel out of this particular area, right? And then your extension needs to be known in that particular, what do you say, impact area, right?
So I can then I can understand it as this way. So you have a pyramid of ecosystems, right? And it's actually a pyramid. If you look at worldwide, right, the number of within organization integrations that are done, it's in millions. But then if you go to intra-organizations, where only 2 or 3 organizations are there, it is lesser number. And if you go to something that is in terms of public health, the number of implementations is even smaller. And if we are going to talk about intercontinent integrations, it is very small. It's like on the top of the pyramid. So what I am able to understand from you, Satyam, is that basis where your integration lies within this pyramid, right? Take a decision.
Take a decision. Nothing is hard and fast, because yeah, validator will give you an error. Validator will definitely give an error if you are if it is not able to access the URL. So FHIR validator, if you do a validation and the extension URL is not accessible, it will give you an error. Now, what I have also seen is if the extension URL itself is meaningful, right? A lot of people can figure out what it is. Simple extensions where you have just value, right? It's easy, correct? Because it's string, there is nothing more logic to it, correct? Maybe we'll take extension a little bit in the next session, right? Because extensions needs to be learned because it's a little nuance, means there are some nuances to it. And though it has been given as an a good thing, right? It can go out of hands also if we don't do it correctly, right? So we'll take it next week whenever we are doing the session. So when we talk about profiles, we'll talk about extensions, we'll talk about constraints, we'll talk about slices, right? These are the three things that in profiles that are most important: constraints, slices, and extensions. We'll take up next week. Okay. So last thing that I wanted to show you here, if you want to know what are the IGs that are there published, right, across the ecosystem, FHIR maintains a registry of all the implementation guides. Okay, it's fhir.org/guides/registry. You can go in here and you can find it. I think I found India's IG also. So let me check again. See. Okay. So all the IGs that are published, which HL7 knows about, right? It maintains it in the registry. As IG developers, right? We should also publish, or we should also notify. If you want an IG to be in the public registry, you should be able to notify. So if you're doing something which is general purpose, which is very, very like something which is like you think can be used by others also, right? It's a good idea to publish those IGs, correct? So IG registry is a good thing. If you want to again know every IG, which is not even published, but people are playing around and trying to do, and they're using IG publisher, FHIR IG publisher. You can go to build.fhir.org/IG. You will see all the IGs. Okay. Maybe someday we will try to publish an IG also, but may not be in scope for this particular FHIR basics learning session. Maybe in advanced session or whenever we get some time, it will be an involved session. And everyone has to have their laptops and all ready. Maybe we'll do a one-on-one or face-to-face kind of a setup. But learning FHIR IG building is also a good exercise that you can have. Nowadays, it is simplified because nowadays there are tools that can do it. And the other tool that you should also learn is FHIR, FSH and Sushi. We will cover that also in some place. So whatever FHIR resources you are creating, right? You can create in a FHIR shorthand also. So for example, you can say patient.name, TAC, patient.name.last name. That shorthand also exists as a standard. We can look at that as well in the next session maybe. So profile and maybe FHIR shorthand could be our next session, the Saturday session. Sunday session, I think we will publish by end of the day today, what exactly will be covered.
I want to just take a couple of minutes of the audience to make understand. So keep them informed of what is going to come tomorrow. Can I share my screen?
Please, please.
So one of the things that did come up during the chat. Okay, I am not a developer. Can I learn FHIR? Is there any scope for me to learn FHIR? Persons who are coming as clinicians, right? Now, so the answer is yes, but rather than just saying it as yes, we are going to showcase to you tomorrow that what does it actually involve for a non-programmer to do FHIR. This is more from a functional perspective. Also, one more thing that I want to address within this particular room is that sharing of documentation. I try to share it as a Google document. and the number of people who are trying to access the Google document broke Google, and Google started complaining to me that there are just too many people accessing your document. So in order to resolve this, what we have done is that we have resorted to GitHub. I understand GitHub is not very friendly for clinicians, but we feel that this is the way how it is going to be there in a proper repository. And of course, you can just use the links itself to download. So have I shared my screen? My screen is visible, right, JP?
Yes.
JP?
Yes.
It's visible.
And you're seeing the GitHub page, right?
Right.
Yes.
So this is the GitHub link. I'm going to post this on the chat. I'll post it on the chat. Thanks, Selva, for posting it on chat. And on that, you will. I have not yet created folders, but you will start seeing folders by end of today. My request is please clone this particular repository, and we are going to use this repository for tomorrow, right? And what is it that you can expect in tomorrow's hands-on session? So thanks to all the persons behind this particular document, specifically JP, we have come up with one outpatient story, right? For persons who do not come from healthcare background. It's a very nice way of learning the domain. Put yourself in the patient perspective. And you would have undergone all these procedures, right? It's a beautiful story. We have tried to depict it. On the left-hand side, you can see that the patient registers visits the registration or reception desk. From there, he goes to the nursing station. From there, he goes to the doctor's office. From there, to the cath lab department, then to the radiology department, back to the doctor's office, and then to the pharmacy. The story has been kept simple but broad enough to cover the majority of the departments that is there in an OPD, in an outpatient journey. The content has multiple levels, simple to medium to complex. So depending upon your knowledge level, you please use this document accordingly. My idea is that you need to take this and convert it and map it to FHIR resources and attributes, right? We have been seeing, okay, what is the content of a FHIR resource? We learned about identifiers, we learned about codable concepts, so on and so forth. Apply whatever you have learned in the last 3 sessions, as well as in case you have attended the interim sessions by SPP also. You can implement all that knowledge using this particular use case story. Use this story, first map to FHIR resources. If you are brand new to FHIR, I think so this is something that anybody can do. JP, you want to add any few words on how we are going to use this document?
No, I think we're good. I think we're sharing this document, right? So that they can go through before attending tomorrow's session. At least everybody will be familiar with the storyline created and try to identify the resources as far as possible.
Yes. So that is the idea. Just give me a second. I was trying to work on the background while Satyam was doing the session today. Just give me